Good morning, everyone. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know that there'll still be people joining us as the intros commence, but a big welcome on behalf of the Public Policy Forum to today's event. We do such important and interesting work, and I have to admit this session interests me so much and is such a critical issue. My name is Julie Caffley, and I'm Executive Vice President of the Public Policy Forum. Ça me fait grand plaisir de vous accueillir ce matin. Merci d'être là, puis merci d'être parmi nous. C'est une discussion évidemment très importante. For those of you who don't know PPF is a bridge builder. We look at breaking down barriers between leaders from different sectors, offering new perspectives and fresh ideas into policy discussions. And we believe that good policy is critical to making a better Canada. And we do research, we do convening a bit more virtually than ever before, of course, and we celebrate leadership in public policy as well. So really delighted to have you with us this morning, and a huge thank you to our partner. We work very closely at PPF with Ryerson University, with the Diversity Institute, and also with the Future Skills Center, and really delighted to collaborate with their team and with their thought leaders. And a special thank you to the organizers today that helped to bring this together on the PPF side, Victoria, Masha, Hustini, and Heba. And on the Diversity Institute side, Kayla and Dan played really an instrumental role in pulling this together. So thank you for their efforts, and a lot of it was done in quite short timing. So a big thanks to that. Before we actually begin today, I'd like to, of course, do a virtual land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. So please join me in acknowledging Indigenous peoples of all lands that we're on today, to reflect on the importance of the lands from coast to coast to coast, which we're humbled to call home. And as individuals coming together, and as part of PPF organization, the Diversity Institute, and the Future Skills Center as well, we do this to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to collaborate in a spirit of reconciliation. So with this in mind, welcome to our event, Deepening the Divide, where we'll collectively explore and shed light on the Black student experience during the pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic has both increased our collective dependence on the internet for access to work, services, education, while also simultaneously deepening the digital divide for those who cannot access it. And research is showing that Black students have been disproportionately affected, as racialized neighborhoods tend to have limited access to computers and internet, while also suffering the highest rates of COVID-19, not to mention barriers to access online education. As we know, the United Nations has declared online freedom to be a human right, and we must ensure that the internet is open, accessible, and nurtured. So what you will find here today is that digital infrastructure is lacking, particularly for many Black students. Earlier this month, many of us were part of the City of Toronto reading about and approving the Connect-TO, the program intended to increase digital equity and expand access to affordable high-speed internet to underserved Toronto residents. So this is a step in the right direction, but obviously there's still a long way to go. And of course, we're in Black History Month, and we all must remain informed and active in working towards a diverse and inclusive society. So a commitment to dismantling structural anti-Black racism and ensure that everyone has an opportunity to flourish in all areas of their lives, which obviously includes education and the internet. The theme for this year's Black History Month is The Future is Now, which maps well on the theme of the conversation today. Indeed, those who can access and harness the power of the internet are best positioned for the future. So we're going to talk about the need for systemic change through this lens today. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers who I'm really anxious to hear more from. They're going to talk about programs, strategies, really innovative tactics, and really hands-on approaches that can help to level the playing field and create opportunities for Black youth. Just a bit of housekeeping. We're going to hear from our speakers. We'll have some question and answers following our speakers. And we're going to try to kind of weave together the different discussions. We are recording this event, and it will be shared publicly on our website following the event. And so right now, we're going to get into our first two speakers who I know I'm looking forward to hearing from. Dr. Mohamed Elmi is Director of Research at the Diversity Institute. He holds a PhD in information systems from University of Cape Town. Prior to this, he studied international development at St. Mary's University in Halifax and a BA from UNB. And also Dr. Andrew Parkin. Andrew's career has been driven by a commitment to bring diverse interests together, from decision-making and deliberation and bridging the gap between policy research and policy dialogue. Andrew's a political sociologist by background, having earned his PhD at the University of Bradford, and he's held a variety of senior positions in academia and across the ecosystem, and is the author of numerous publications. So with that, I will pass things over to Mohamed to start things off. Welcome, Mohamed.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the warm introduction, Julie. I'll be sharing a PowerPoint presentation. Please let me know if you see it, if everybody's seeing it on their side. Thank you. I'm very grateful to be here on with such an esteemed panel to offer some insights about Black student experience, particularly during Black History Month. And so over the next few minutes, I want to lay the groundwork for our discussion by offering some of the context about the Black population in general in Canada, but also dig deeper into some data about Black student experience from the largest school district board in the country. And so we know that Canada's Black population is about 3.5% of all Canadians, and it's been a number that's been increasing. About 52% of Black Canadians reside within the province of Ontario. And about a little over 26% of the Black community are less than 15 years old, which is a very young population. And so they're directly at the center of the discussion around education and education pathways. In the last census, more than 50% of Black people were immigrants, most from Africa, compared to earlier groups, including the Caribbean. And we know some parts of the country have had a significant Black population for generations, as far back as the 1600s. And so one of the things we understand is this concept of the impact of education as a pathway to social mobility, and I'll be talking a little bit about that later on. But in the 2016 census, the employment rate of Black men aged 25 to 59 was lower, 78% compared to 83% for other men. And these numbers have been greatly impacted by COVID-19, resulting in an increase in employment of Black Canadians versus non-racialized Canadians in general. And so what we do know about the Black experience, and this is some of this data comes from our Black Experience project, in which we worked with Environics Institute, as well as United Way, the YMCA of Greater Toronto, to try to understand the lived experiences of Black individuals in the Greater Toronto area. We interviewed more than 1,500 individuals for a significant amount of time, many over 2 hours, to try to understand their lived experience. And what we found was that younger Black Canadians report facing more incidences of racism than older immigrant parents. And younger Black Canadians also report suffering negative consequences as a result of this racism more often than their parents, their immigrant parents. These findings coincide with the reduced educational outcomes and subsequent generation of Black youth. It's important to note that the median age of Black Canadians is 29.6% versus 40.7% for the general Canadian population. And when we asked them about their experiences with racism stereotypes, they noted as the greatest challenge facing the Black community. And we know through the Black Experience Project that it is the younger generation that views it as the racism as the greatest challenge. And you can see that impacting the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement specifically. That movement has been driven largely by young Canadians who view racism to be something that has to be challenged in order to open up pathways for them. And one of the things that we do have to understand, particularly about the experiences of Black students, is this concept of social mobility. Education is one of the strongest drivers of social mobility, yet internationally and within Canada, persistent gaps remain in academic achievement, contributing to unequal outcomes in employment, health, and belonging. There's extensive research that suggests anti-Black racism and other forms of discrimination play a significant role in these outcomes. In addition, over 50 years of evidence suggests that socioeconomic status and family background deeply shape academic outcomes within the school system. So social mobility describes the ability of someone to improve their position within a stratified society. Seeing a lack of role models, many Black youth feel discouraged from pursuing higher education and employment in specific fields. The result is significantly lower university application rates compared to non-racialized students. And I just wanted to highlight one of the research that the Diversity Institute conducted, funded by TD Bank. We examined senior leadership and corporate boards across 8 cities. And what we found right across these 8 cities, Black individuals are wholly underrepresented. And in fact, across the more than 9,000 individuals on corporate boards, we could only find evidence of only 13 of them being, of Black individuals being among those, which is a dismal rate compared to the general population of 3.5%. And in a city like Toronto, where the Black population is upwards of 7% of the population, it is just dismal. When we examine, again, looking at the data from the Black Experience Project, we find that only 60% of individuals who attended high school within Canada stated that they always or often felt they received a good education. And that leaves a huge percentage feeling that they're not getting the right education. A notable percentage sometimes or never felt that being Black has challenges not faced by the others within the educational context, within the high school context specifically. At the same time, these experiences of racism pose challenges in education for Black students, particularly in terms of the absence of role models, as I mentioned. While many participants have had positive experiences in high school, a significant portion say it has been at best or sometimes. About 4 in 10 say that either sometimes or never felt accepted by their teachers, or that the school was a welcoming place. And almost about half indicate they felt that being Black represented challenges not faced by the other students. And one of the things that the research, and this is data from the Toronto District School Board, the TDSB, which is one of the only school boards that collects race-based data. And data is sorely lacking right across the country to make informed decisions. And in the 2017 TDSP census, it's found about 11% of TDSP's student population is Black or identifies as Black. But within that data, what the TDSP found was that there's a dropout rate of 20% versus 11% for non-racialized and 9% for non-Black racialized students. The graduation rates are 69% for Black students versus 84% for white students. Academic programs in the academic stream found that 53% of Black students were in the academic programs versus 81% of non-racialized students. So these dropout rates increase the longer the family has been in Canada. So this tells us that there's a significant underrepresentation. There's a significant declining social mobility of Black Canadians within the education context. And so pathways to social mobility, when we look at who's graduating and where they decide to go, we find about 43% of students in 2017, Black students, did not even apply to post-secondary institutions. And when we look at either confirmed in Ontario University or college, the numbers are significantly lower. And so that tells us that we need to put in supports to allow students to be able to find education as a pathway. And so there are other aspects. 42% of Black students have been suspended compared to 18% of non-racialized students, and 94% of Black youth reported a desire to complete an undergraduate degree. So this goes back to 94% think that they want to apply to university, but only 43% of them have applied. So there's a significant gap there. And COVID has definitely impacted the quality of the education and the type of opportunities available to students. COVID has increased our dependence on the internet and for access to work, services, and school in particular. And so when we are looking at the students who are facing barriers to learning opportunities, they're more likely to be engaged in homeschooling. And so when we dove into the TDSP data to look at who has access, we can overlay that map to students who have no access to digital services more broadly. And then when we look at the neighborhoods that have had the biggest impact or have had the highest transmission rates of COVID, you can almost overlay those maps on top of each other to see the trends. And so what I want to conclude with is Black students continue to face significant barriers to educational and employment outcomes. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these effects, particularly with access to the digital divide. And there is some progress, particularly with Ontario emphasizing that they're going to de-stream students, no academic, no apprenticeship streams. We need more data to be able, more than just Toronto, we need nationwide, province-wide data. And we also need mandatory Black racism for teachers. And so with that, I just want to conclude by saying that there are ways forward, and I'm happy to note that my co-panelist, Dr. Grace-Camille, will be offering one of the examples that we've been working on for the last year. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mohamed. So I'm sharing my screen now, and like Mohamed, I hope that it's working and you can see my slides. So thanks to Julie and the Public Policy Forum and the organizers of the event for having me. I'm clearly not here with any expertise specifically in the main topic of the discussion, but I'm being asked to come because I'm the survey research guy, and we have been working with the Diversity Institute and the Future Skills Center on comprehensive survey research about some of the things going on in Canada right now around COVID. So it's that information that I'm here to share. So I'm the executive director of the Environics Institute for Survey Research. We're very happy to work in partnership with a number of different organizations on all of our projects. We were pleased to be involved with the Black Experience Project. We recently worked with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation on the Race Relations in Canada survey. A survey that we're hoping to repeat this year with a specific focus on experiences of discrimination during COVID. And the survey that I'm going to talk about today, as I said, is one that we've done with, in partnership with the Diversity Institute and the Future Skills Center. So just a couple things in general. I mean, I'm going to show some data. I doubt very much that any of the data I will show will surprise anyone. It's not that we've uncovered new things that many have not been commenting on for the last 11 and a half months of this pandemic. But what we're hoping to do is contribute to the base of evidence that builds up over time. So we can, I guess, leverage our degree of certainty as we make the points, many of which Mohamed has just made extremely well. So I'm going to talk about the second wave of our skills and employment survey, which was conducted in December as cases were unfortunately climbing and climbing. So the second wave of our survey coincided with the second wave of the pandemic. And we have a survey of over 5,000 adult Canadians. And that's complemented by a companion survey specifically of a group in Northwest Toronto. That map that Mohamed just showed, that showed the areas of greatest incidence of COVID, is exactly the area that we had a companion survey to boost our sample of respondents specifically in that area. So before I get to some of our new results, I just remind myself, remind everyone of some of the things that we've seen already in previous studies we've done just over the last few months. And they point to a general pattern. I mean, it's clear that everyone in Canada has been affected in one way or the other by the pandemic, but there are patterns. And there are patterns, I think, particularly affecting youth that we've seen. So young people tend to be more affected. In some cases, it's especially young women. We've also seen that immigrants, racialized Canadians, some cases more specifically in our survey of millennial and Gen Z that we've done with apathy and boring, we can see that those who identify as Indigenous or Black or South Asian report being more directly affected or more deeply affected by the pandemic. And another pattern, as well as those demographic ones, is that it's particularly the mental health aspects that people are pointing to. So when we ask about the economic impact, the impact in terms of future plans, and the immediate impact in terms of mental health, it's the latter that comes out as most acute, I guess. So in our survey in August, when COVID cases were not as high as they are now, but even at that point, over 1 in 2 young women were experiencing depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and so on related to the pandemic. And that was when the numbers were much better than they are now. So that just some background then to what we've seen more recently. And I'll go some of this through this fairly quickly again, just to paint some patterns. So kind of just dealing with the general impact of the pandemic, what's happened over the last few months. Again, everyone reports being affected to some degree. That's increased as the second wave of the pandemic increased, but it increased most acutely with youth again. So young people are reporting a bigger change as we went to the second wave of the pandemic, bigger change in terms of the deeper impact of the pandemic. And then there's also that geographic element here on the bottom left, that there's different intensity in different parts of the country. So the GTA more affected than the country as a whole, the city of Toronto more affected than the GTA as a whole. And then that northwest corner that we talked about again, that Mohamed highlighted on his map, twice as likely, people living in that part of Toronto, twice as likely to say they've been greatly affected by the pandemic compared to the national average. So there's differences going on by age, by geographic area. I'll get to income in a moment. Just sticking with age, when we ask people how they're doing in terms of their mental health, this is the result for people who say they have excellent or very good mental health, and those who say they have fair and poor. And so you can just see the difference there with students. Now, we interview people 18 and up, so this doesn't report people who may still be in high school, but those who are currently students, much more likely to say they have fair or poor mental health right now than excellent or very good. And you can see how that compares to different groups. So clearly, again, this thing comes back of the situation with youth, with young people, and again, with the mental health aspect. Also concerned that the inequalities that we have in our society are exacerbated during the pandemic. So when we ask Canadians who are in the labor force whether they've been earning less or more or the same as a result of the pandemic, you can see that the lower your income is, the more likely it is to say that you've been earning even less during the pandemic. The higher your income is, the more likely you're saying that you've been able to get through the pandemic with no change in your income. And that's true across the country, and it's true in the GTA. So there is a sense in which income can insulate you to a certain extent from the effects, maybe not the direct effects of the virus, but the knock-on effects, the economic effects of the lockdown and so on. Other issues I think that are relevant, the work of caring for members of your family, caring for older members of your family, your children, members of your family who may have a long-term illness or a disability. Those who have young children at home are actually more likely than average to also be caring for older people at the same time. Those who are racialized are also more likely to be offering that kind of care. 1 in 4 of those who identify as Black in Canada are caring right now on a daily basis for an older member of their family. That's also higher for those who identify as Indigenous. So there's, a lot of this is focused on children and children in school, which is very right. But many of those people who are trying to support those children are also supporting other members of their family. When we turn specifically then to the situation in schools, again, it's the geographic, I guess, impact or distribution of these experiences is not even across the country. So across the country as a whole, about 1 in 3 children, sorry, I've got to move my screen so I can see my own numbers. About 1 in 3 children have been able to continue to stay in school in person. That's lower in the GTA. In the GTA, I think up to 2/3 of children have been learning online one way or the other. So that raises, of course, the question of whether they're equipped for success if instruction and learning is going to be online. And that just gets to some of the last data that we'll show here, which is, as you would expect, there's an inequality of access to resources. So in terms of being concerned about your ability to keep paying for your home internet or for your cell phone, the tools that we're relying on to stay in touch and in the case of children, continue to learn during the pandemic. About 1 in 3 Canadians have a concern financially about access to those means of communication. But that is closer to or above 2 in 5 for those who identify as racialized, 44% nationally for those who identify as Black, and then also then higher than average, as you can see, for those who are in the GTA specifically and identify as racialized. So there's, I think these again are some of the issues that Mohamed highlighted in terms of the inequality that affects us geographically, by income, by age, and by racial identity. And in many cases, those things compound. And I think this is the last slide that I have today, which is on the same theme. So this is a question for parents whose children are learning online, again, about access to the resources that they need to be successful and keep up with their learning. It's a question we took from the US, so we have some US data. This is from Pew, the Pew Research Center. So that was kind of our baseline. I was actually, everyone always says, are you ever surprised by any of your findings? And I guess I was a little surprised to say that the situation in Canada is actually a little worse than in the US in terms of the number of families that have to do to kind of makeshift arrangement to ensure their children can learn online. Not being able to complete their schoolwork, for instance, that's the middle bar, not being able to complete your schoolwork because of problems with access to a computer at home. 20% in Canada, sorry, 20% in the United States, 28% in Canada. And then among the racialized population in Canada, it's even higher at more than a third. And you can see how that plays out, having to have your children complete their homework on a cell phone because they don't have access to a computer. Again, higher among those who identify as racialized in Canada. And the same with having to use public Wi-Fi. So as I said, I think those are patterns that people have commented on. And what we're trying to do with this survey is to kind of just help paint in or help fill in the picture of evidence around these issues. But maybe I'll just finish quickly by recapping those themes that we do see this overlapping of issues, exacerbated impacts for youth, particularly on the mental health side, particularly in terms of access to the channels of communication we need to keep learning going in areas of Toronto that are low income or more likely to be low income, more likely to be racialized, and so on. And this just compounds the inequalities that we already have existing. This is new data, so this is not published yet, so I can't point to a report, but I can point to where you can find these reports as they come out, which would be on our website. And one of the things that I always like to mention is that the Environics Institute is a not-for-profit public interest organization that, and we make all our data available to other researchers. So this is not proprietary information. This is information we're trying to put in the public domain and in the hands of those who may be able to do more with it and answer more questions than we're able to do ourselves. So please keep that in mind. And then finally, I'd just like to thank again our partners in the survey, the Diversity Institute and the Future Skills Center, and also to thank again the Public Policy Forum for having me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Mohamed.
It's a pretty stark picture, and the numbers are so clear. And as Mohamed said, they're dismal. I just wanted to know, Mohamed, if you could respond to Grace's comment in the chat. We have such clear data. Is there a sense of apathy, the inaction by leaders? Can you talk a bit about that?
That's a great question, and thank you, Grace-Camille, for the question. I think for the first time in a very long time, particularly when it comes to education, I'm starting to see glimmers of hope. I'm starting to see programs targeted towards Black students in high school and earlier to try to get them to think about different pathways to, whether it's college, university, or in the trades themselves through programs targeted towards Black students. And I'm very happy to have both Grace-Camille and Trevor on the panel because they've been running a program for many years now. Study Buddy is just an online version of some of the programs that they were delivering, targeting racialized youth more broadly, but Black students in particular, to offer them that pathway. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement has really brought to the fore this inequality. And so you're seeing initiatives like the Black North Initiative try to change who's in senior leadership positions and who's in the boardrooms. And government is coming to the fore now with its 50-30 challenge to encourage companies, universities, and other sectors to improve their representation of racialized people more broadly.
Thank you, Mohamed, for that. Thanks for the fascinating data and for your sense of hope amidst all that's happening. We're going to go to our two next speakers, and then we will have plenty of time for questions and interaction from the audience. So I invite you to, add your questions to the chat and to the Q&A function. And we're delighted to, I didn't actually ask Andrew and Mohamed if they're willing to share their slides. There's been a couple of requests for that. and to share that if you're willing, then that would be great. Mohamed is nodding and Andrew is nodding. Man, not really nodding. He might be able to.
As soon as we're cleared, I mean, it's just new data. So we have no reluctance to share any information. It's just a sequencing issue. We just have to make sure that all the partners are ready to have it out because we just got it in.
Okay,
so
and we'll
the
ensure
the answer is yes, but maybe not tomorrow.
Okay, so when Andrew is able to release that, we'll ensure that we send it to everyone registered and attending today so that you have that. So we will promise that follow-up when it's available. So now to go on to our next two speakers. Trevor Massey is the chair of the board of directors of the Lifelong Leadership Institute. He spent a lifetime working in the management ranks at post-secondary institutions like Centennial College and has served on a number of provincial agencies and committees. As an education management consultant, he's served a number of post-secondary institutions, including the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, the University of Technology in Kingston, Jamaica, and l'Institut Collégial in Ottawa. And he has extensive history in community service and leadership. And also Dr. Grace-Camille Munroe, who's the manager for research, projects, and operations at the Lifelong Leadership Institute. She holds a doctorate in adult education and community development with a focus on transformative learning from OISE. Dr. Munroe has held executive leadership positions in the Jamaican education system, including at the Ministry of Education, among others, and is also a Confiti Fellow at UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. She currently works as manager for research, project, and operations for the Leadership by Design program, which is the signature program for the Lifelong Leadership Institute. So we're going to start off with Trevor Massey. Over to you, Trevor.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for inviting me today. The promotional literature for today's discussion promises a conversation about innovative approaches to creating opportunities for Black youth. I'd like to use my time to tell you about the Leadership by Design program, which is a leadership development program offered by the Lifelong Leadership Institute. Before I describe the Leadership by Design program, consider not only the, this is interesting, discouraging data which Dr. Elmi shared, and he was hopeful. Consider this. In 2016, University of Toronto had a first-year class in medicine numbering 259 students. One self-identified as Black, and that one subsequently was the valedictorian for the graduation class last spring. University of Toronto, to its credit, consulted Black medical professionals and came up with a more responsive admissions process, and last September welcomed 24 Black students in its first-year class. You'd think other universities would see U of T's experience as a catalyst for change. Well, last year, 2020, the Faculty of Medicine at Queen's University did not admit one Black student in its first-year class. This was a repeat of what happened in 2019. The situation was not very encouraging at many other schools of medicine or many of the university faculties which offer STEM-related programs which lead to lucrative future-proof careers. The University of Toronto is spending $100 million to build a temple for research and development in artificial intelligence, a technology we were told will significantly influence our lives and provide important and lucrative careers. I heard from a senior official of a high-tech company that this technology is, quote, dominated by 2 races and 1 gender. And there are consequences to that. If we want Black students and professors to walk the halls of the AI and other STEM-related buildings, we must work to bring this about. To this end, we recently partnered with the University of Toronto, where the university will offer an innovative 3-year STEM-based program to 38 of our grade 10 students. This is a start in making a difference. And I want to point out that for change to take place, we have to work collaboratively. The institutions that are slow in bringing forth change still need our support because this change is going to be an inside effort and a collaborative effort, and we need to be party to that. If we want to change things, meaning, if we want to live in an equitable world where Black youth have the same opportunities for success as other groups, where negative racial stereotypes do not inflict mental and career hardships, and where structural racism do not abound like minefields which impede and inhibit, then we have to employ all available tools. These tools, of course, include policy, the law, and the relentless application of advocacy, as well as requires an abundance of strategic initiatives and the employment of good, effective, and responsible leadership on the part of all elements of our wider community. Which brings me back to the Leadership by Design program, the ambition of which is to provide the widest set of opportunities to incubate a deep bench of Black leaders who can pave the way forward for the Black community and for the wider community. This is not to say the Black community does not have effective leaders. It is to say we need more. To use a sports term, we need to flood the field with Black leaders. The Leadership by Design program admits promising Black youth from across the GTA, starting in their grade 10 year. Last fall, we admitted some 70 grade 10 students. We provide development during the grade 10, 11, and 12 high school years and continue this support throughout university. Understanding that much learning takes place outside the formal classroom, the program supplements high school learning with a suite of learning activities aimed at student success, career success, and effective leadership. I'd like now to provide you with a visual insight into the Leadership by Design program, because for most of you here, you may not be aware of this program, and I just wanted to screen 5 slides which will simply introduce you to what exactly our programming looks like. And if we can have some of those slides at this point. Oh, okay, until the slides show up, for the current year, there are some, beg your pardon, the slide that you're looking at right now is one which highlights a program which we're working with University of Toronto called Pursue STEM. And this is where the University of Toronto will take 38 students from our program and provide them with STEM learning. And this will span 3 years, from grade 10 through 11 and grade 12. The next slide, of course, speaks to coding. We believe that each and every student should have some background in coding if they can. Not that they're going to be invested as programmers as such, but certainly coding is involved and embedded in just about most careers we have today. And also we think that coding is an important part of how students can develop a discipline of thinking and of the mind. The study buddy tutoring program is one which we'll talk with in more depth in a short while. My colleague, Dr. Camille Grace Munroe, will address that in short order. So that gives us some insight to the Leadership by Design program in a graphic way. But I do want to point out there are some other initiatives that we have. And by the way, all these initiatives are free to the students and to parents. And parents are very much involved in the Leadership by Design program. They are partners to what takes place. In other words, when in developing programs for students, parents cannot drop them off for service, head off to shop at Yorkdale and come back to get them. So parents are full-fledged party to what we do, and they reinforce the learning that takes place. The Leadership by Design program, of course, provides other supports such as skills workshops, mentoring where they can have models of successful Black individuals, mentoring which allows them to understand that there are spaces where others have gone into, and the students themselves can go there as well, and they need not go with fear. One key thing that we underscore for our students is a deep sense of belonging, that they can enter any space and feel that they belong, and that they need not be petrified or even feel that they're imposters in those spaces. Our program provides as well career exploration, scholarship opportunities for the students in our program. And it's a wide-based, broad-based intervention which says, we want our students to develop all the broadest skills that any leader should have. That includes communication skills, that includes ability to collaborate, the ability to make decisions, and just generally to get things done. When the pandemic disrupted teaching and learning in March 2020, the Leadership by Design program quickly adapted to the virtual world. We knew then, as now, that students and their families would experience varying degrees of hardship having to do with social isolation. The challenge of having appropriate student space at home, navigating a different relationship with parents and siblings, adapting to the new teaching and learning methodology, and coping with deficient technology. We read about pandemic-induced stress and anxiety, and we understand it to be widespread. And on multiple occasions we brought in a professional child psychologist and a social worker to provide guidance to both students and parents. Many students reported they adapted well, at least during COVID part 1. Many struggled, from the student who missed classes because his brother would not yield control of the shared laptop, to the student who lost motivation to get out of bed and do required schoolwork. In the face of COVID, the Leadership by Design's provision of online interaction among students and parents was a balm to the challenges of COVID. The programming we delivered, especially the tutoring, coding, entrepreneurship, and webinars, went some distance in addressing isolation and fostering community. Nevertheless, the key features of our leadership program served well to tamp down the harsher manifestations of the pandemic's challenges. By the way, the sense of community and belonging that our in-person meetings provided in abundance to students and parents cannot be readily and easily duplicated in the online world. Consider this. Before COVID, the metrics described a lot of Black people who were not good, and you've seen data to that effect this morning. So, while the onset of the pandemic exacerbated the conditions of the Black community, the conditions were not good to begin with. A bad situation simply got worse. I wish I could say we have great hopes for improvement as we emerge on the other side of the pandemic. These impediments will continue after COVID. And this begs the question, should our policy conversation be about COVID, or should it be about seeking innovative solutions to existing structures that perpetuate racial group inequity? We're entitled to ask, if government resources can be mobilized as we saw to combat a pandemic, couldn't similar resources be mobilized to ensure all citizens receive equitable opportunities in social justice? We can only hope. Thank you very much.
Trevor, thank you so much for laying out such an excellent example of the Leadership by Design program and our efforts at changing or presenting a counter narrative about how our students can succeed in such challenging times. My introductory comments are going to be rather brief, but centered around the idea that when we meet our students at their point of need, they thrive. So as mentioned earlier, the Study Buddy program was initiated through a collaborative partnership by the Diversity Institute, Ryerson, the Lifelong Leadership Institute, and the Ontario Tech University's Faculty of Education. Its response was primarily to address the severe disruption of the teaching and learning process that was occasioned by the pandemic. The Study Buddy program had two key intents. That was one, to reduce the learning loss that was caused by the pandemic, but also to provide our students with the academic support that would assist them to thrive in such an environment, building out their capacities where academic resilience and efficacy is concerned, but also giving them confidence and hope for the future. And in addition to this, it was also to provide the teachers in training with meaningful work integrated learning opportunities that would see them through their practicum. But in addition to this, the Leadership by Design program also felt it necessary that in order for students to thrive within this new modality, that they also needed to be supported with the mental health support and academic resilience through the regular Leadership by Design programming that was primarily geared towards strengthening our students' capacity to adapt to this new normal, but also making them effective online learners. I'm so happy to say that as of today, we are now emerging into the fourth cohort of the Study Buddy program. I believe that the Study Buddy program at this point in time is an attest, the fourth phase that is, and based on the feedback from our parents and our students, can attest to the growing success of this program. And I just ask my colleague to just share the slide on the outcomes achieved, just to have you taste a little bit of what it is that we're experiencing with our students. So pretty much what we asked our students to assess for us was their overall experience with the Study Buddy program. And I'm happy to state that of the number of hours invested and also the very, very promising participation rate from our students, on average that 9 out of every 10 respondents reported that high levels of satisfaction and reported learning. And as you can see from the slide here, the study buddy program through the interaction with their tutors, again, that sense of belonging, through the interaction with their tutors, which provided them with an opportunity of targeting their learning needs, but also developing what we requested were learning goals and outcomes that the students and the parents are happy to state that many of their needs were met. They were more organized with their schoolwork. Their levels of stress was reduced. Their confidence was increased, and of course, the appropriate training with respect to the tutoring was provided. But what was most important for us was, yes, the numbers are important, but it's always the stories behind the numbers that intrigue me. And here are some of the feedback from our students. One of them said that the study buddy program provided a safe environment. My tutor related to my fears and concerns. Another, I received an outstanding achievement award in chemistry. My final mark was 96%. And I believe that one of the things that contributed to this award was, of course, my tutoring. Parents also had their own feedback in that the program was fantastic. This parent worked full-time, and so they were able to provide their student or have the student be provided with the extra support they needed to gain their help. In addition to the overall experience for the students, it was also the interactive nature, the platform that was used. And here, one of our students saying that it was interactive and engaging. But what I also found interesting was that for many of our students, the study buddy program was their first tutoring experience, and the fact that it was free made it even more amazing. What do we understand from all of this, or what can we take from all of this? It's my considered view that all our students can learn and that they must learn, provided that we meet them at their specific academic points of need with the timely, targeted, and well-resourced support, including financial support. And as ensuring that there is an encouraging tutor-student relationship, that this academic endeavor is complemented by academic enrichment supports, mental health, and learning to learn strategies and tools to build efficacy, to build confidence, and to, I guess, in essence, to give our students a sense of optimism, especially within this rather uncertain period of our lives. A lot of the success of the program is also attributed to the quality of the tutors and also the system. And finally, that with collaborative partnership intent on making a difference, our students can learn and succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to both of you. What a great concrete example of success. So congratulations for all of your hard work. It's so important. So now we're going to go back and open the dialogue a bit. We've got some questions coming into the Q&A, and I have plenty of questions of my own. We'll go back to the four speakers. There's a question that came into the chat that I'm interested in. Maybe I'd ask this to Mohamed and Andrew. And it's regarding the racial disparities in the educational data. To what extent can we delineate the disparities are related to wraparound factors? So housing, healthcare services, food security, as opposed to the school system. And more importantly, are there any progress on those wrapped around factors now so that disparities could be reduced? I don't know if either of you would have some feedback, or any of you, frankly, on that question. Maybe I'll start with you, Mohamed.
Certainly. That's an excellent point. Schools are not islands unto themselves. And sometimes I think we ask schools to carry and teachers to carry the burden of society in most instances. I believe that the wraparound services would greatly impact the educational outcomes and attainment of Black students in general. So this includes something as basic as housing, safe housing, infrastructure support. So internet, I am so happy that the City of Toronto is going to be putting in place access to broadband internet at low to no cost right around the city. And so that alone will be able to allow people to save even, you know, the lowest cost internet with basic services is $50, but on average it's about $100 in the city. So those costs, and then the federal government has promised to increase child care subsidy as well, to increase the amount that goes out to families too. And we know the child care subsidies have had one of the biggest impacts on child poverty rates in the country. I'm not saying that child poverty is no longer an issue, but those direct supports would greatly reduce the amount, the number of children in day-to-day poverty. I'll pass it on to my colleagues soon.
Grace, did you want to add something there?
I do, thank you. I think the research is quite clear, where it suggests that there are a number of factors impacting on the teaching and learning process, which are both school and non-school factors. And taking those into consideration would give us a holistic view of some of the disparities or the challenges that our students are facing, and as such, be better able to address these issues, which is why I refer to having a targeted approach, which requires us having a better understanding as to what is happening in the homes of our students. What are, and not just the homes, but the families. And I go back to Branfena's whole idea of the ecology, and you know, social ecology, and looking at the family, then, you know, contextualized or entrenched by the other factors of the broader society. And therefore, I think it is important that any kind of analysis around addressing the needs and coming up with sustained and high impact initiatives to impact on the lives of our students and their families needs to take in also the non-school factors.
Excellent, thank you. Did you want to add something, Trevor?
Well, certainly. I think the wraparound effect is critical to how students fare. In the Leadership by Design program, we're very committed to that. And I'm going to give you one example of a wraparound. We have a mentorship program activity, and we tend to refer to it as the mentorship ecosystem. And we see in that the student being supported by a teacher champion in school, and there are teacher champions, by the way, there are many, but also the parent who at times can take off the parent hat and put on the mentor's hat. We have, for instance, for the students who entered in grade 10, we have provided to them mentoring services in terms of a group, because we've discovered that Black students actually fare better in a mentorship role, especially when they're younger, when they work in a group. They can collaboratively explore issues, and they can feel very much at home in that setting. So the group mentoring that we refer to as the mentorship circle, what that allows is for the student, especially the student who's enduring some measure of isolation, for that student to come out occasionally and to participate in a group discussion, other than the friends that they have at school. But here there's no challenge, there's no teacher given marks. It's simply students coming together with the guidance of a trusted friend, and to be able to meet each other online, to talk collaboratively. This has worked very well so far. But generally, the whole notion of surrounding the student with supportive individuals and supportive system, certainly it works. And it works very well.
Trevor, a follow-up question is regarding the leadership emphasis as a youth development program. And there's a question in the chat referring to Stephen Covey's Leader in Me approach. And perhaps if you could talk a bit about the leadership emphasis within the program.
I'm delighted to. First of all our students in some way are practicing leadership in their communities, in their families, in their groups, their social circles. So they already are practicing leadership. The point, though, is that we want our students to be able to build their leadership capacity, and that's what our program is about. So we're giving them all the tools, and we don't really start by focusing too much on the various theories of leadership, of which there are hundreds. We do focus, though, on distilling leadership to some of its component parts, and we tend to refer to these as the soft skills of leadership. Okay, and so we're talking about resilience, communications, teamwork. We're talking about critical thinking. We're talking about intellectual curiosity and social capital. And if you take something as simple as social capital, it's about networking. And it's a skill that in the Black community, we're not doing enough of. And so we need our students to, from very early on, to acquire those skills. But more to the point, we're saying, we're not just wanting our students to be effective leaders in their schools and their and amongst their fellow students. We understand that and we want that, and that is actually taking place. What we do want, though, is a sort of big L leadership at some point in the careers of these students. And that means we want our students to be able to take their place around the table. We're looking at some point for a portion of our students becoming at some point seated at the table leaders, people who can affect the agenda, who can be party to the discussion, students who actually, it's like saying in a corporation, you hire. That's a tremendous amount of power to do things. In a school, a principal is in effect not just a leader by virtue of person, but also what we might call positional leader. And that person, by virtue of that, has a lot of authority to affect the environment, to change the school tone, to deal with issues of racism. And you don't get that if you're not really in a position sometimes to do that. And so, in essence, we see leadership as the big tent activity, that skill that all students should acquire. And we think that if they do so, they stand a very good chance in all the things they do and to achieve personal and social and professional success. To close off, remember this. Every job interview touches on the essentials of leadership. Every entrepreneur has to have critical skills which map to leadership. And so leadership is that key skill that if you can master it and continue to practice it through life, you have a much better chance of becoming successful.
That's great. Thank you, Trevor. The next question, I think I'm gonna put a bunch of different questions that we're receiving together to both Trevor and Grace. And there's questions regarding, do you collaborate with certain school boards? How do you access the program? How can we support the program? Someone's asking. And, maybe talk a bit about funding during the pandemic and how you continue to do the good work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for that. We do collaborate with educators across the board. Most of the collaboration tend to be with the post-secondary sector. We see our program as occupying a sweet spot between high school and university. For instance, we want our students to be very familiar with the university environment. So all our in-person meetings are at university locations. We tend to do that. They're encountering high school Monday to Friday. So outside of those hours, we take them to the high school setting, to the university setting, so that they can aspire and see what is available, because so often they are unaware. So right now, the collaboration is with Ryerson University, the collaboration is with York University, the collaboration is with University of Toronto. We're really in the business of collaborating with the post-secondary sector because we think that they have tremendous tools and inspiration for our students. I'm not sure whether Dr. Munroe would like to add to that. I'd like to leave some space for her to bring her perspective.
Well, thanks, Trevor. And just in keeping with that, we conducted a survey this summer with all of our cohorts, over 130 students, and especially the cohort that is in the university at the moment. One of the things they mentioned was that the exposure, the simple exposure of going to a university setting and feeling what it's like, may help them quite significantly in adjusting to the university experience. So again, that shock, that initial shock was not there. But I also think it becomes important in providing our students with an opportunity of aspiration. So when we take them to these environments, it's literally to say, you can be here too, yes? And so we create that kind of environment that supports them in their aspirations and their desires to just be.
I think the question also inquired about funding. And funding is a big issue here, because invariably the government funders set criteria for funding that really do not hit the target from our perspective. I'm going to pick my way carefully here. We're trying not to be in the business of patching, of simply being superficial. We're trying to apply some depth in terms of what we can offer students. And that's why our program spans well over 3 years of high school and then into the post-secondary sector. Because we don't think you can have a Saturday moment, go home very fired up, and then that's it. So we are in the business of sustained development, and hopefully that will have some impact. But invariably, governments, when they're funding Black activity, underfund and perhaps insult. And what I mean by that is that the funding is very focused on a program, deliver this program, but very little is given to the core funding, so you can structure an organization to properly deliver the program. So you can structure an organization with a staff that is in place to be able to do a good job, so that you can pay staff a reasonable and fair wage. We have a lot of Black community organizations that are doing very good work, and they're piecemealing their staff because that's all they have to spend. And you cannot function and deliver important work in this field if your staff if you've got high performance staff paid a small stipend. It just doesn't, it's not a good equation. Furthermore, the governments sometimes, I'm gonna use a cute phrase here, they at-risk us to death. That is, every time there's a reference to the Black community, we're talking about at risk. And they're not saying, let's build youth to the point where they can challenge for meaningful jobs, significant jobs. They can be full participants in the broader society. We're always being just barely supported to stay at the fringes. And we're not in that business anymore. We really want to be full-fledged players. We want to take our kids and propel them into spaces that can have impact in the broader society, because they're not just Black Canadians, they're Canadians. And we really want to be party to the whole, not just a piece of the main. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to Grace and ask a question that's come in from our audience. And this is similar to the question that you posed at the beginning of the session. So I want to hear more from you on this. And it's about the balance between celebrating Black success, having more visibility than we frankly have in the past and during Black History Month and regarding, all that's happened in our world over the past few years. And at the same time, highlighting these growing inequalities. The data is so clear. How does one overshadow the other? You talked about apathy earlier. Could we hear you a bit more on that subject?
Sure. I think based on what Mohamed shared with us earlier, is that in this space wherein there's the issue of social justice, and also it's either an overrepresentation or an underrepresentation or a misrepresentation of certain groups, is that there is almost the desire to create a space that changes the narrative, which is why I'm of the view that research becomes so important. It also becomes important that we create opportunities like this by which we can, yes, speak about the issues that continue to plague us, but also celebrate the hope, the audacity of hope, and also the fierce urgency of now that can occur within the same process, which is why I am so proud to be a part of the Leadership by Design program, because yes, while we see the levels of underrepresentation of our students in many of the educational indicators, we can say that there is a narrative, a counter narrative, a counter story that says if our students are provided with the adequate resources, the ecology of support that they can and will achieve. So I'm of the view that where we are, I look at data as storytelling, is that we have a dominant storyline, but there's also hope emerging that says, if we do things differently, and as Trevor has said, you cannot expect to bring about impact, high impact. You can't be about transformative change for a community, yes? And just do it from the margins or in a piecemeal way. There has to be a different way that, you know, in terms of our formula for budgeting for high impact initiatives that has to now be explored. And I, with all of the resources that we have, we're a first world country. We are able to find that sweet spot to be able to look at the initiatives or the innovations that can bring about change. I think it's too long in coming. And as a Black community and a person of the lived experience, we're getting tired of it now.
Great message. Thank you for that, Grace. Mohamed, I'm going to go to you for the next question. And I don't know if you'll have this information, but I know that the Diversity Institute does a lot of work in terms of tech adoption as well. Within racialized groups, and with technology being integral to a large number of jobs and the inequity in terms of access to technology of Black youth, are we looking at, you know, long-term studies looking at these inequities, digital and technological literacy rates for different adult populations? So digital adoption, I guess, if you could talk a bit about that, if you have some knowledge in that area.
I very much a fan of trying to understand the long-term impacts of COVID on student education outcome. We need to be collecting data that is just not for a few months at a time. We need to understand, well, essentially, I believe students have lost essentially 2 years of their education, most students. Particularly if they don't have access to the internet to be able to connect, the digital infrastructure to be able to connect. There's a fascinating Toronto Life magazine article that came out last week, over the weekend, that highlighted how much students and their families are struggling to keep up with online education. Particularly when you have spotty internet, you have 2 or 3 or 4 members of the family, whether they're the mom and dad who have to work and have to be on a Zoom call at the same time as a class that is going on, and they're struggling to be able to maintain bandwidth. And in fact, many students are using their mobile phones to be able to participate in a Zoom class or class, simply because that is something that they have available. I know the TDSB, Toronto Library even, and the Ontario government announced programs to provide tablets, computers, laptops to students who need them. And what we're finding, although these programs are great, I think there's still an effective way to understand how they're being utilized and how students are learning through these technologies need to be greatly studied, and we need to be tracking this on a more consistent basis. The Diversity Institute, as Trevor mentioned, our funding is cyclical in nature, and it is time-based, and so we try to study for long periods of time, and I'm glad since the beginning we were able to track students in the Study Buddy program, and for our other programs, including soft skills training for university-age students, we're able to try to understand their needs, the barriers that they're facing. But I think we need to understand every school board, every province, every Ministry of Education needs to be actively and consistently tracking this information about access to technology and how comfortable they are.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mohamed. So lots of questions coming in. One question regarding the role of public libraries, and you just mentioned an initiative in terms of hardware. Can anyone talk about some of the role of public libraries in terms of bridging some of the gaps that we're exploring today and supporting students?
Do you want me to take that question?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So from the library perspective, and we've been lucky, we've been working with the City of Toronto to try to understand the impact of COVID more broadly, and technology being a very particular case that we're helping with in one of our studies. And thanks to Andrew's survey work, oversampled in Toronto, but right across the country. And so one of the things we were trying to understand, and the Toronto Library gave us access to their Borrow a Laptop program to see who's borrowing. But essentially, that's all the information we have. We don't know usage, the types of usage. Are people borrowing it for jobs, or are they borrowing it for just their daily usage? We still don't know. We would need to go out into the field and ask the participants exactly why they're using the laptop. Maybe Andrew, if you have any insight into that data, that'd be great as well.
On the particular issue of libraries, I'm not sure if I do. Sorry, you caught me flat-footed there.
No, sorry, I meant the participants you interviewed in Northwest Toronto. Yes. Just
yeah, in general, I mean, I showed some of it. You can see the impact of COVID. There's a lot to learn there, including the fact that we can see the impact of the type of employment that people have in that part of Toronto. So, for instance, even though it was more impacted by COVID, the people living in that part were less able to work from home. For the reasons I think we know to do with the essential services that they provide, the types of employment that they provide. So again, if you live in more wealthier areas of Toronto, that wealth transitioned, or that wealth allowed you to insulate yourself a little bit from hazardous working conditions and so on. So you can see that, but maybe I'll just take the opportunity to just touch on another point too, because one of the things we've seen in this data, and it's a point that many people have made better than me, but I'll come back to it, is the importance of disaggregating as much as possible. Thanks to the support of the Diversity Institute, we feel we've built a good survey with oversamples and so on, and yet we still can't. With the best data we have, we still realize that the experience of different communities, different cultural communities and different geographic communities are very particular, and they get lost. Maybe the best way to summarize it is that in other survey work that we do around Canadian attitudes to different types of policies and so on, it can make some sense to talk about a group called racialized, because there's a certain commonality of perspectives that you can see in the data. When it comes to COVID-19, we're finding that category breaks down more than ever, because different groups who within the category of racialized have very different experiences. And you can see that even in the Northwest Toronto data, that people who would identify as Black and people who would identify other communities have different experiences. So some of this leads to a plea again for ourselves, but for everyone else, that our categories sometimes are not nimble enough, not specific enough to pick up on what's happening. And that's just to end on this, that because COVID is despite the fact that it's a pandemic, right, which means it's all over, right? Despite that fact, it's something that has very localized manifestations depending on income, where you work, where you live, how old you are, and what community you're from. And I fear that some of slips through our fingers.
Thank you for that, Andrew. A comment from Ricardo Morales, who's a former principal himself, and he refers, makes an observation about, going to conferences in the 90s where the story that was painted seems quite similar today. And I wonder, Grace or Mohamed, in terms of your research, in terms of longitudinal work, we've seen things deepened by the pandemic. Overall, are we doing any better? Are efforts improving, or? Grace?
I'll start with a very interesting note in that I was born here but grew up in Jamaica. I came back here in 2019 after 20 years of being away. And a lot of the issues that I experienced in the education system as a student are the same stories that I keep on hearing yet again. And so, Ricardo, that's a very, very interesting observation. And I think it therefore draws into stark reality, the need for us to do not just more research, because I think sometimes you can do so much research that you become paralyzed from what is there, but it's knowing how best to translate research into action. Yes, and this is where I see as researchers as a role, and even as institutions, especially involved in research, is our capacity to advocate for change, and also the need for us possibly to change some of the methodologies being used, because again, that's a beautiful thing about research. It's iterative. It tells its own story, and it's able to change as it goes along. At least in my mind, that's where transformative knowledge comes from. It's being open to what the stories that are emerging from this, and regrettably, the story seems to be the same. So the question therefore is for us is, will we continue the status quo, or will we change? And I think we're at a point in time with the Black Lives Matter thrust, if you want to call it a post-Trump era, I don't know, but that there's no a need for us to change the way we do things with a view of equity in mind, yes, deeper equity in mind, and meaningful transformation for the lives of those who are within our communities. For one reason, I believe that there is not only a social cost to racism, but there's an economic cost. I'm of the view that Canada, and Toronto in particular, can benefit so much more if it created the space by which diversity and the benefits of diversity of thought and experience and knowledge can be provided. So yes, the story seems to be the same, but I do believe that there is hope, and the hope is us, the researchers, those of us who are on this call today, to share the story about the LBD program and what we're doing, and also the other programs that are on the ground that are doing similar feats. Mohamed?
Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it appears to be that change is slow. But the thing that I like to point out too is when you have government agreeing that streaming should be ended, that is a massive, massive change in how the school system was operating. And that is a very, very big difference moving forward for future students. I believe streaming was one of the biggest determinants of students who could even find out that university was an option. And by acknowledging that this was detrimental to a particular set of students, that alone is a massive improvement. At the time I didn't know it, but I was one of the students who was encouraged or streamed away from the university options, because I studied, I'm an immigrant to Canada, but I came here when I was relatively young. And when I was in high school, the math teacher said, Mohamed is struggling with math. And so I think you should put him in this, the level 3 math, which would not have allowed me to apply for university. And so had my mom said yes in that moment, I would not have been able to go to university right after graduating high school. and my life would have been completely different. It's ironic that I ended up getting a PhD in information systems with data analytics as the as my focus area of study. So it's just amazing that that could have been an option had my mother not known that university was not in my future. And she, in fact, insisted that was the only thing I needed to do in life.
Proved them wrong, Mohamed.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
You proved them wrong.
Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those things where streaming was such a detrimental, has had such a detrimental impact that by removing that one barrier, you can see other things changing slowly. And data, to know that 43% of TDSP students do not even apply to university, then you can do something about that 43%.
There's so many great comments and so many questions coming in, and I know we could go on for much longer. I think celebrating Mohamed's mum and all the mums out there who are advocates for their kids is a great way to end this. Of course, parents play an instrumental role in this whole process of believing in their kids and ensuring that they advance and do all sorts of amazing things. So that brings this session to an end. Thank you to Mohamed, Andrew, Trevor, Grace-Camille for joining us. Thank you for the Diversity Institute, the Future Skills Center, to enabling so much of this fabulous work. It's absolutely an honor to spend this time with you today. And thanks to each of you for the inspiring work that you do to make this country better. We're very proud.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.